Well, I always have to put on my genealogy hat. Yes, my first answer is yes, reason exists. But I also want to say that reason is something that exists differently in different times and places, and it can change. And the way I would think of it is this. Reasoning, I guess I would say currently, the way I understand reasoning is that it is a set of techniques and principles for how we judge something to count as evidence, and how we move from things that we count as evidence to a conclusion. And I think that in that sense, if you define it that way, reason exists with every group of humans. They all have some way of making judgments based on some kind of evidence. But how that has worked, how that does work, can be very different. It's very different in different fields, obviously, and it's very different cross-culturally, and it's been different historically. I, at one point, read a whole bunch of transcripts from European witch trials, from the Inquisition trials. And standards of evidence for witch trials, of course, have been parodied by Monty Python, but they really are different standards of evidence, and they weren't made up for the witch trials just so that the Inquisition could convict a bunch of people of witchcraft. Those were really the standards of evidence and used in courts, in canon courts at least, pretty much across the board in Europe then, with some alterations. So what we count as evidence that can lead to a conclusion can vary tremendously. Foucault talks about what he calls regimes of truth, or sometimes he calls them regimes of veridification. So how we think about what connects to what in order to give us what answer depends upon that regime, just like grammar. So the way we speak a particular language is governed by a whole set of principles, which we learn to speak without being aware of, and which many people never really master, and yet they can speak perfectly well, whatever language it is that they speak. Same is true of reason. I think that we grow up with a particular regime, a grammar of thinking, and that enables us to function. So on the one hand, if you define reason the way I just did, of course there's reason. Of course there's always been reason here and there, but reason in the way that the Enlightenment thinkers thought about it, rationality, some kind of faculty of the mind or property of it's kind of timeless logical functioning. I don't think there is that. I don't like to make statements like that because you can't prove that. But on the other hand, you can show that what people think reason has changed dramatically over time. So I feel more comfortable with that kind of empirical claim than with the categorical claim that there is no transhistorical, timeless reason. But I tend to think that there isn't.